Good day, grade 8. Today is our MAPEH in week 2 from 4th quarter. My name is Rinaldo B. Magimban. Our primary objectives is to control overall transmission of disease, monitor transmission rates and severity of the disease, is the impact of COVID-19 in hospitals and care homes, detect clusters of outbreaks of the disease and specific settings, and to prevent the recurrence of COVID-19 once it has been brought under control. In today's lesson, we talk about the disease prevention and control. In disease in pathogen, a pathogen is the organism that causes a disease, and your body is naturally full of microbes, and this is also the pathogen are different in can cause disease upon entering the body. Now, what is the epidemiology? Epidemiology is the science that deals with the study of epidemics and communicable diseases. Epidemiologists are the scientists who study human disease as they affect human populations. Example, the hypothesis people who are eat at the church picnic were more likely to become ill, and the exposure is eating the church picnic, and from the outcome is illness. This will need to be defined. For example, ill persons are those who are diarrhea and fever. Second hypothesis is people who are eat egg salad at the church picnic more likely to have laboratory confirmed the salmonella. So the exposure is this: eating egg salad at the church picnic, and the outcome is the laboratory confirmation of salmonella. Let's talk about the communicable diseases. In the communicable diseases are caused by pathogenic, that disease producing of microorganisms, common called as germs, infecting and multiplying in the susceptible host. Infection is the invasion of body by the disease of causing of organism that affect the health of the individual. So these are some causes of communicable diseases. The one is chickenpox, measles, diphtheria, influenza, whooping cough, and pertussis, and also include the SARS. In the epidemiology of communicable diseases, that disease-producing organism pathogens include the following. From the type of pathogen, we have the bacteria, the viruses, the fungi, the protozoa, and each description in bacteria is single-celled organism without a nucleus. In description of viruses, thread-like particles that produced by taking over living cells, and the fungi in description simple organism including the mushroom and yeast that grow are single cells of thread-like filaments. The protozoa also description in the single-celled organism with the nucleus. Now, what are some human diseases caused by pathogen of this type? We have also the strep throat, staph infection, tuberculosis, food poisoning, tetanus, pneumonia, syphilis, and also include the malaria, go up to the genital warts from the hectoplasmosis in mushroom poisoning. Let's talk about the rickettsia. The rickettsia, visible under the optical microscope. Why? Because the constitutive agents of typhus fever and Rocky Mountain spotted fever. So these are highly pneumonic bacteria that may occur in the forms of bacilli or threads. In the pathogenic diseases, that includes the four parts of the pathogenic. The one is the bacteria, again the virus, the fungi, protist. In bacteria, we have here the infection, the pneumonia, and the food poisoning, while the virus is common cold, influenza, or flu, and AIDS. In fungi, we have athlete foot, the ringworm, and the protist also in malaria. So this is caused by the rickettsia from the disease, organism, vector, and reservoir. In the disease, we have the Rocky Mountain of spotted fever, scrub typhus, epidemic typhus, urine typhus, and Q fever. So this is the causes of the rickettsia on the diseases. Now we have the common shape of bacteria. In bacteria, this is some of different shapes of existing of the common shape of this organism. The one is the root shape that present in the diseases such as typhoid fever, tuberculosis, and leprosy, while the spherical shape present in pneumonia and boils, while the spiral shape or corkscrew shape present in syphilis and Vibrio cholera. Next is the fungi, or what you call the fungus. In the plural is fungi. So it is in like the plant-like organism, including yeast and molds that are bigger than bacteria. They are present in the skin infection called athlete foot. So this a group of eukaryotic organisms that include the microorganisms such as yeast and molds, as well as the more familiar mushroom. So these organisms are classified as kingdom, which is separate from the other of eukaryotic life kingdoms of plants and animals. Also include the protozoa. In the protozoan in plural, it is an informal term for a group of single-celled of eukaryotes, either free-living or parasitic, which feed on the organic matter such as other microorganisms or the organic tissues in debris. While the worm include the flatworm, the roundworm, and the hookworm. Worms are many different distantly related animals that typically have a long cylindrical tube-like body, no lips, and no eyes. We have the smaller disease-producing of microorganism, a certain bacteria of Pneumococcus, Streptococcus, Staphylococcus, and typhoid bacillus, or rather typhoid bacillus or wrinkle-shell bodies, and their very small of poliovirus appear about as they are shown above by 20,000, a source of Shepherd J of the Healthier Living highlights. Next is also the larger disease producing the microorganism. In the larger disease producing of microorganism responsible for amoebic of dysentery, malaria, sleeping sickness, athlete's foot, syphilis, and cholera looks about as they are shown above by 1,500. So this is the chart of the virus of nucleoprotein in RNA and influenza virus of anatomy, included the lipid envelope, the part of neuraminidase, the hemagglutinin, and from the figure 1 we have the capsid. Next is the viruses and influenza. Influenza or flu may arise from the different strains of influenza virus, such as type A and B, an Asian or Hong Kong. Flu vaccine is given every year depending on the strain that is currently potent and being spread. So this is the very viral infections that attacks your respiratory system, your nose, your throat, and lungs. Influenza is commonly called the flu, but it is not the same as stomach flu viruses that cause of diarrhea and vomiting. For most of people, that flu resolves on its own. Next is the infectious mononucleosis. In infectious mononucleosis is caused by the Epstein-Barr virus or EBR, which is also associated with certain forms of cancer such as lymphoma. So this, from the left side, we have the symptoms associated with the infectious of this mononucleosis from the side and to the symptoms. And what are some causes of this illness? We have the fever, the fatigue, sore throat, swollen lymph glands. Next is the viral hepatitis. These are infections of the liver. These are infections that cause liver inflammations and damage. Inflammation is swelling that occurs when tissues of the body become injured or infected. Inflammations can damage organs. Why? Because these two kinds of viral hepatitis are infectious hepatitis and the serum hepatitis. Both are communicable diseases characterized by the yellow colorations of the skin. Next is the common cold of medically referred to as a viral upper or respiratory tract infection. So these symptoms of this common cold are particularly in our cough, sore throat, low grade, fever, nasal congestion, runny nose, and the sneezing. So in our home particularly, there are some remedies for this case like cold and flu. We prepare the garlic that people who are chew clove of garlic are less likely to develop the diseases. The flax seeds also used as best of home remedy for a common cold, and also the carrot juice. So this carrot juice is very common kitchen remedy to treat cold and boost energy. So what are the factors that cause the existence of infectious diseases? The one is the agent factors, 2 host factors, 3 environmental factors. In the agent factors, these are organisms that cause infectious disease, which include the bacteria, virus, rickettsia, fungi, and protozoa. The degree of disease-causing ability of organism depends on the virulence of organism and the number of organisms that invade the body. Next is the host factor. So this is a refers for the individual who may have or may not have resistance to the invasions of disease producing the organisms. A person with poor health is more susceptible to an infectious disease than the healthy one with a strong immune system. The other one also is the environmental factors. So these factors of environmental that include physical, social, and biological factors that influence the probability of developing an infections. And what are they? Number 1 is the biological factors that include sources of causative agents, example water, food, soil, and animals. In social factors that include customs and behavior of people when doing some domestic activity like cooking food, washing dishes, etc. While the physical factors also the sanitations of this area where an individual lives affects the spread of communicable diseases. Hospitals are also sources of disease-producing organisms. Let's another view in transmissions of communicable diseases. There are common means by which communicable diseases are transmitted to people, and these are the one is by respiratory discharge. By respiratory discharge, we have the common colds, influenza, tuberculosis, sore throat, scarlet fever, mumps, rubella or German measles, the whooping cough or chickenpox. Second, by discharge from the intestinal tract or by contaminated soil or water like cholera, typhoid fever, the parotid fever, hookworm disease, dysentery or amoebic and bacillary, and also the snail carrier. While by contaminated food or milk, we have the salmonellosis or food infection, botulism, cholera, typhoid fever, intestinal worm, tuberculosis, and then also included the trichinosis. 4 is by association with animals like the ankylomonosis, lumpingo, anthrax, rabies, and by the associated with the animals. Number 5 is by insect bites. We have also include the malaria, yellow fever, typhus or loss, filariasis or mosquito, African sleeping sickness or tsetse fly, dengue to mosquito. Then we have the rat flea. In number 6, we have by sexual intercourse like syphilis, gonorrhea, glirolomia, or gliroloma inguinale, soft charcuterie, and also the venereum. In this stage of an infection, we also give the recovery stage of these patients. Of an infectious disease are generally goes through the 5 stages. We have the incubation period that it begins with the pathogens enter the body and multiply and spread, while the prodrome period, a short period wherein the individual begins to experience discomfort. Symptoms may include headache, fever, running nose, loss of energy, and irritability. While the clinical stage, this is the time when the disease has attacked the body. 4 is decline stage. So this disease has passed its peak and the symptoms begin to go away. So the patient feels better. The disease is still communicable during the clinical and decline stage. And the last is convalescence. This is the recovery stage of the patients. Next is the mortality and morbidity. In mortality refers to the state of being sick within the population, while the mortality refers the number of deaths within the population. For example of morbidity, so the system of provides direct commonly influenza of mortality data that are otherwise unavailable. In particular, mortality for those who are hospitalized with the measles is a clarified or reduced. So that's some of the examples of morbidity. While the mortality example, we have the infant mortality was extremely high and the upper classes were not exempt, but poor of hygiene lead to high in mortality among the children. And that the city most shocking statistic is the high of infant mortality rate. So these are the often used together. There sounds a bit of similar. So it's no wonder that some of confusion exists when it comes to choosing only one of them, the morbidity and the mortality. Another is the epidemic, refers to the rapid and extended spread of disease among the many individuals in one place. In endemic, it is a disease that peculiar and recurring in locality, while the pandemic is when the disease spreads throughout the entire country, continent, or the whole world, especially today in our pandemic in COVID-19. So the body has system of natural defense to combat a vast of number of infectious organisms. So these are some different kinds of body defense. What are they? The disease control. So we have to describe ongoing operation aim of reducing the incidence of this disease, the duration of disease, risks of transmission, effects of infections both physical of this disease control, and the financial burden to the community, mainly focus on primary and secondary prevention. This primary prevention is the evidence-based action that seek to the avert disease before it develops. A proactive in on individual level purpose is to limit the incidence of this disease by controlling exposure to risk factor or known causes, or increasing individual resistance against the exposure effects. The body defenses in immunity. we have the skin. So the skin surrounds that protects the organs of the body. Bacteria-killing chemicals are present in skin secretions such as perspirations, tears, saliva, and secretions in the genital region. A cut in the skin is a weak spot in the defensive system of the body. An opening or a cut is one way by which pathogens can get into the body. We also include to check the blood and tissues. The blood tissues contain chemicals that kill bacteria and viruses. The white blood cells surround the destroy that bacteria by digesting them. Tissues contain cells that behave like white blood cells by attacking the pathogen. Inflammations. So this occur when the body detects the presence of an attacker or foreign body or pathogen. So the outward signs of inflammations are redness, swelling, and pain in the area of infection. When more healthy tissues around the infections are destroyed, an abscess is formed. It is filled with pus as odorous fluid that contain dead cells. We have also included the fever. When infections spread out to other parts of the body, the individual runs in a fever. This causes in part of poison that is released by invading the pathogens. When the body's temperature rises, the production of white blood cells also increases to fight in pathogens. Next is the interferon. According to researchers believe that viruses inside the body can produce protein that can be infected against other viruses. Researchers also believe that some types of bacteria and artificial chemicals can cause cells or produce interferon. Next is immunity. One of the most effective ways of protecting man from communicable diseases is to increase his resistance. A high degree of resistance is called the immunity. The body's ability to resist infections depends on a certain type of white blood cells called the lymphocytes. These cells produce the antibodies that can destroy bacteria and virus. Each type of antibody is effective only on a certain type of pathogen. So we have the two types of immunity are passive and active. In the passive, natural passive immunity occurs when the mother transfers antibodies across the placenta to her unborn child during the pregnancy, and when the child is born, he or she has the same immunity as the mother. Passive immunity is short-term protection, while the active vaccination is a form of developing active immunity. A vaccine may be injected into the body or taken orally in order to produce antibodies against the specific disease. Active immunity is usually a long-lasting, particular protection against diseases such as measles, polio, diphtheria, and tetanus. And next is the prevention and treatment. So prevention is the most effective weapon against disease. It means avoiding contact with harmful pathogens. People, food, and places are possible sources of pathogens. When you have infectious disease, keep away from other people to avoid spreading the disease. Depending on its constitutive organism, some of general rules in treating minor illnesses that include in bed rest, drinking enough liquids, staying in clean area, and avoiding very cold or warm places, following travels advisory for people going to different countries, and also the following medical or hospital treatment according to the advice of the physician treating the deceased. So what is the difference between the acute and the chronic disease? In acute illness is a sudden disease from which a person is expected to recover or treated immediately, while the chronic illness characterized by the long durations of sickness that limits the activity of an individual, causing physical, emotional, and economic problems. So these early detections of disease in prompt treatment are the most important things to do to avoid chronic illness. So the difference between the acute and chronic: in acute, disease lasts for just short time but can begin rapidly and have intense symptoms. An acute disease can be mild, severe, or even fatal, or cold, influenza, and strep throat. While the chronic is the disease is persistent. It lasts for a long period of time, might recur. Like the acute disease, chronic disease can be mild, severe, or fatal. Chronic disease produces symptoms that last for 3 months or more. So we have the common chronic illnesses causing of limitation of activities like tuberculosis, the malignant neoplasm of growth or cancer, benign of unspecified neoplasm, asthma and high fever, diabetes, mental nervous condition, heart condition, hypertension, or the chronic sinusitis, and the peptic ulcer. That include on the common chronic illnesses causing of limitation of these activities. Let's proceed the health habits and the disease. So the kinds of activity in habit that we do affect our health and well-being. So the types of chronic illnesses that we may have in the future are influenced by our current practices in lifestyle. In the bad health, we have smoking, dining out every night, not staying active, getting too stressed out, and having a few too many cocktails. But in good health practices that include the proper nutrition, balance of work, play and exercise, avoidance of drugs, cigarettes and other substances that can cause illness, and also the abundance of sources of infection. Let's move around the view in rehabilitation. So many patients with long-term illnesses can be restored to good health condition only through the process of rehabilitation. Individuals with handicaps and long-term illnesses can become useful through the rehabilitation. Physical therapy is a form of rehabilitation technique that helps people with muscular or arthritic pains. So the first step in the rehabilitation process is to carry out a detailed interview with the patients and significant others. Constant changes are made depending on the patient's performance by psychological meditations and behaviors, then using the principles of reinforcement and contingency management. So these are some facilities in rehabilitations. Before I out my lesson, I will give you some thoughts. Health is not just about what you are eating, it's also about what you are thinking and saying. That's all for today. For more updates and clarification, please send a comments of my personal messenger. Thank you. My name